Good morning. Welcome to our session. My name is Dave Frosley. We are going to talk about extending Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. So this is the Enterprise Edition product. I'm going to say AX a lot in this discussion because there's some historical context about the AX platform. So if I say AX, you know what I mean. It's the same thing. So I'm a principal software architect. I work out of the Fargo office. I work on the part of the application team for the product. So with the financials and human resources team primarily, although I've been focused on extensibility for the last 9 months or so as we've kind of made a major shift in our customization approach that we're going to talk about in this session. And I'm here with Chris. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Gardy. I'm also based in Fargo, North Dakota with Dave. I'm a senior program manager on the platform side. So I have taken on extensibility about 5 or 6 weeks ago from Robert Badawi. You may know his name. But yeah, you'll see me on Yammer, the Yammer group that we'll talk about later on.
Okay, so our agenda for today, we're going to go through this brief intro, talk about some outcomes and introductions, and then we'll spend some time talking about a little historical context, a little bit about where we're going and why we're changing the customization model as we go forward and what the impact of that change really is. Then Chris is going to walk through what we call extension capabilities in the product and give you an overview of that, and I'll try to reinforce that with a demo, kind of make that a little bit more concrete to help you understand what this is all about. We'll wrap up with some best practices and some Q&A. We'll try to hold the questions till the end. I think we're about at an hour of content or maybe a little bit more, so we should have about 10 minutes or so at least at the end to take some questions. So there's 3 primary outcomes that I hope you'll take away from this. First of all, learning about what the benefits of this extension-based customization approach that we're going to describe, understand what the capabilities are in the product for doing extension-based customizations, and learn about some of the patterns and best practices about moving from our historical way in the AX platform of customization, which is overlaying, to extensions. So that's what I hope you will learn, and with that, I'm just going to transition right into some motivation, roadmap, and impact, but first I'm going to talk about biking a little bit. So any bikers in the audience? Few? So I want to talk a little bit about pace lines. Chris and I both do some biking, although I solo bike more than anything else, but I've ridden a pace line some, and a pace line is a pretty cool experience when I've done it, and it's this idea of a group working together to perform better, first of all, because you can go faster in a pace line, but you're also kind of sharing the workload as you go. So with a pace line, the lead rider is the one kind of cutting the wind, and the rest of the group in the pace line is drafting off of the rider in front of them. And the lead rider will pull the group for a period of time, maybe a couple minutes or something like that. Stronger riders will pull for longer time periods, and weaker riders might pull for only 30 seconds or something just because they can't keep up that pace that the group is trying to ride at. And then when they're done pulling, they'll kind of slide off to the side and go all the way to the back of the group, and the next rider will then start pulling. So I like to think about this as a bit of a metaphor for how the implementation phase goes for a lot of ERP projects. It's a big project. We're trying to get to the destination all together, and by all together I mean Microsoft, partners, customers, people within the organization, the customer, working together to get to the final implementation. And it's a big deal when you get to the finish line, right? Emails go out, celebrations happen, and things like that. But what the challenge is, a lot of times, is after the implementation, where the downside of a pace line can be where riders start to being dropped, meaning they can't keep up with the rest of the group. So they end up falling back. You see this in, like, if you ever watch the Tour de France or something like that, you see a lead rider break away, and other parts of the group can't keep up with the pace, and they fall back. And that's the challenge we have a lot of times with ERP implementations that we've had historically, is that while the product that you purchase might be moving ahead to new releases and your partners might be bringing out new releases, the customer sometimes gets left behind because they can't upgrade to those new bits because it's costly, or there's quality concerns, or the timing's not right for the business, things like that. And if you take that a step further and go a few years, sometimes the customer is way back, right? And it's hard to be way back to catch up again. Now it's really a lot of work to get to the point where you are successfully working with the rest of the group. And our goal with this mission with extensibility is to change that paradigm so that we're all riding together all the time. So what we've set out to do as a journey, it has started actually about 2 years ago, to remove overlaying as a pattern of customization in the system. And the goal is much more than just removing overlaying. The goal is to get to this point of continuously updating the platform, reducing friction in that overall upgrade process, and then ultimately improving the implementation speed and quality with time. And the ultimate goal is to be able to innovate together. So as we at Microsoft innovate with our solutions, as partners innovate, customers can take advantage of those today instead of sometime in the future when they go through this major effort of catching up. So as we bring out analytical workspaces and things like that, the goal is that you can take advantage of them sooner rather than later. We also want to lower the total cost of ownership for our customer and for our partners, to be frank. I mean, partners have a lot of different versions to deal with from us and their product and stuff, and different implementation versions, and it's all very costly to the ecosystem. An extension-based customization model lends itself to a higher quality implementation ultimately. So that's another goal with this. And really kind of the tagline on the bottom, every customer on the latest release always, that's the vision that we are striving to get to. So talking a little bit about this, taking a little bit of context of what overlaying is from a customization standpoint, and I'll step back just a little bit for those who maybe don't have a lot of historical experience with AX. So the overlaying customization pattern involves multiple layers in the solution, and partners and ISVs, implementation partners, customers can add metadata or code at these different layers, and it basically overrides the lower layers. So the classic example is Microsoft might have a method in one of its classes that an ISV needs to customize. So what the ISV would do is he'd take a copy of that method, the full source code, and add his code in the place in that method, sprinkle it in here and there to solve his needs. And another ISV might take that same method and do some customization. And then at the time of implementation, a partner would have to merge those two code customizations together into another method that would bring those things together, or maybe add some of its own customizations. And what happens at runtime is this top method would win. And the same thing works for our metadata-based design constructs like forms and things like that. So you can see where that's hard to upgrade, right? If Microsoft now changes something in that method, not even the method signature or anything like that, that would normally be seen as a breaking change, just changed some logic in there. Now the whole ecosystem kind of has to react, and it's a costly thing to do. So that's what we're trying to move away from, is this intrusive way of customization via overlaying. And we're doing this in 2 steps. We're kind of following the kind of classic deprecation model in software engineering, where we go through a phase where we're warning developers that you shouldn't be doing this, and then leading to a point where we'll actually create errors. And the warning phase we call soft seal, and the hard seal is when we get an error. And it's not soft seal for customization, meaning that you can't customize the product. It means you can't do it with this old school way of overlaying. You have to use this new way of extension-based customization going forward. And we think that the extensions that we are providing, that we're going to talk about, lead to a really full suite of capabilities in the product to be able to customize it to the needs of your particular situation, but they're going to be the way to customize, and it is a bit of a change as we go forward. So if you look at the release roadmap, this has been in place for several months now. I mentioned that this is a journey we started a couple years ago, and it starts at the bottom of the stack. I mean, the kernel/platform was always hard sealed. That's some C++ code that we don't share. It's the core of the runtime. But the two models above it, the app platform model and the app foundation model, are released as part of our platform offering. And those actually had a hard seal as of almost a year ago now. So there's been no overlaying of those models in the last year. And what this has enabled the platform team to do is go to a monthly release model. So they've been able to roll out binary updates on a monthly basis, get those uptaken in the ecosystem. We've had some growing pains with that, but in general, the model has proven itself out to say that, we can start to update more frequently, get innovation and bug fixes out to the ecosystem in a lower friction way than we ever have before. So once we started to get through that part of the journey, we took the next steps, which was to start to seal the application models. And that's what I've been working on for the last several months. We've started that with a soft seal of some core AppSuite core models, which we did soft seal in the spring release, the July 2017 release, where a number of those models, dimensions, some ledger models, tax, things like that, were soft sealed. And we have the intent of, with the next release, which is going to be fall, maybe easing into early winter, we intend to hard seal those models. Those models are still relatively small compared to the app suite, which we are working towards a soft seal of that this fall with a hard seal of that with the next major release for the application in the spring of 2018, where at that point the model is extension-based customizations. So there's some impact to this, right? There's impact across the entire ecosystem. Starting with Microsoft. So we have a lot of places in our code, in the application code and in the platform, that we need to change and improve in order to make these extensions work in such a way that our partners and customers can build the customizations that they want. So we've been working hard on both some platform features and a lot of application refactoring. We've had teams across the product groups working on this for many months at this point to enable non-intrusive extensibility through new features. I know on the application side, we've had over 2,000 deliverables requests from mostly some of our key ISVs to add some extensibility hook points, and we've been burning through that list. We're at somewhere at a point of 80% through that list, but the list keeps coming in, and we keep working through the list, and we expect that to keep happening going forward. Next up on the list, we can't have overlayer-free implementation without ISV solutions that are also overlayer-free, and that's been our primary focus on the application team for the last several months, is to focus on some of our largest ISVs to help them get through the transition from overlayering to extensions only, and enabling them through some work on the Microsoft side. So ISVs, and we have a lot of targeted ISVs that are part of our app source community, and they're the starting point for building out overlayer-free implementations. The other thing that ISVs have to think about is making their solution extensible, so that when you get to an implementation with a VAR or customer, there's no overlaying that has to happen there, which is the top of the ecosystem overview here. Implementations, it really starts all the way back with the functional requirements and making sure you understand this concept that it's not carte blanche, change anything in the application, which has been the case in the past. You have to think about what can and can't be done, and you also have to think about what your long-term costs are and what the upgradability is going to be of the features, because the benefits are there, I think, when you think about the goal of innovating at the speed of the entire ecosystem. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what we see in the ecosystem. We have, one of the beauties of Dynamics 365 and the cloud offering is we have a lot more insight into what's going on in the ecosystem. And one of the insights we have as packages get deployed through our lifecycle services, we suck a little information off those packages about extensions and overlaying. And you can see, if I look at Q3, calendar Q3, as of a couple of weeks ago, this was deployments to 1,300 instances, 1,300 tenants. You can see about 60% of the customizations are extensions, and roughly 40% are overlayers. So we're definitely making some progress in getting those extensions out. If you look at it from a per customer basis, the big bar are customers that have no overlaying, so that's good news. It's about half of the customers have no overlaying at this point. At the other extreme, we have more than 500 elements. That's objects, not necessarily overlayer instances, so it's total instances is bigger than that. We have a few that are above that, quite a few that are between 100 and 500 or 50 and 100. I have those bars reversed as I look at it now. So there's some that have quite a bit of work to do, and as we move forward with new implementations, we have varying degrees of overlayer freeness as we go. And we also have some pretty good insight into what's being overlayered. And it should be no surprise to the experienced AX developers in the group that it's code-related things, our classes, forms, and tables that get overlayered the most. And it's also supply chain, where we have the most customizations, followed by financials and our service industries code base. So that's what you would see from an overall ecosystem standpoint. So hopefully this lays out the problem and the direction of the solution overall. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Chris to talk about some of our extension capabilities.
Yeah, that's great. So it might just be worthwhile going back to that slide real quickly for those that can't read it. So the big aqua color, green color, is SCM, supply chain. The red is GFM, the financials space. And then the black is service industries. So yeah, it's a really interesting takeaway. So I was going to ask, how many people here are on AX 2009? Okay. How many people are on AX 2012? Okay. How many people are using cloud right now, AX 7, Dynamics 365 for operations? Okay. Okay. That's interesting. There's a big group of people that were none of those, so yeah, welcome. So we have a number of extension capabilities. The big takeaway from my section, I'm going to go through like 10, 11 slides. The big takeaway is that there's a lot of documentation out there. If you search for Dynamics 365 operations extensibility in either Bing or Google, the first unpaid result will be this page, the extensibility homepage. You'll want to look at the introduction and getting started, and then we've got a bunch of information on kind of fundamentals. And then there's a number of how do I articles. So I'm going to talk about some extension capabilities here, but this is a great resource to go out there and search for Dynamics 365 operations extensibility and have a look at kind of that full list. So what I'm going to run through is just kind of a flavor for the options that are available. So as Dave mentioned, we've got extensibility capabilities across the board. For tables, views, and data entities, we want to encourage additive changes. You can add fields, field groups, relations, indices, mappings. We also allow basic properties to be changed, like labels, text, help text, things like that. There's also a bunch of framework events. So these are the events that start with on and then end with ed or ing. So it's things like on inserting, on inserted. So you can influence what's going on with regards to there's something being inserted into a table. And then we encourage code extension using class augmentation. So you can do that for things like display methods. The other big takeaway here being, you can see the Application Explorer over here. is just to try using extensions. So if you right-click on something and start to do an extension, you'll soon learn what the capabilities of the extension framework are. So for forms, it's very similar. Being able to add controls, data sources, and extending the query. Being able to change the basic properties, so labels and text on buttons and tabs and things like that. Similar framework events, just kind of changed. So the naming is very similar, the on and then the ing and the ed. So you get on initializing, on initialized, and then things like a post run method. So you can kind of influence all of those rather than over layering the init method. You can use that on initialized. And then there's different levels of events for the different things that make up the UI, the different elements that make up the UI. So form, data source, field, control, things like that. And then code extension via class augmentation is, again, the big takeaway. Again, just try rolling through the AOT, the Application Explorer, and creating extensions on different elements.
So Chris and I will probably use the term class augmentation and class extension interchangeably.
Sure.
We kind of use both terms in some of our documentation. The differences between them are just kind of nuances, but just to not confuse anybody, we're talking about the same thing.
Right.
Then the other thing I'll just mention, and you'll see in my demo here in a few minutes, for 2009, 2012 customers, internally we've been living in Visual Studio as our development environment for AX for a long time. We tend to forget that. Yes. That may be still kind of a new concept for a lot in the group. So the Application Explorer actually sits in Visual Studio. You'll see that in a few minutes, but that's another big fundamental change in D365.
Right. Yeah. So for reports, the SSRS reports themselves can't be extended, but you can extend the pieces that make up the reports or provide access to the reports, so the data provider classes, menu items, controller classes. And then the best option is always to duplicate the report. So you're creating a kind of a new report using an older report as a base, and then directing people to that new report. And then there's a range of other kind of basic extension capabilities across other types like EDTs, menus, menu items, the security areas, so security roles, security duties within those roles. You can't extend security privileges, but they're at the lowest layer, so what you're going to do there is just create new privileges, add those into the duties and roles that people will be assigned to. And then you can extend queries and base enums as well. So you can extend base enums if they're marked as extensible. And again, the documentation has a full list of base enums that are extensible.
Yeah, and just speaking of enums, that's something on the application team we spent a lot of time on with the spring release and continue to do so. So the issue with enums, as soon as you make them extensible, you have to be very careful about how you use that in code, because the value that's behind the enum is not determinate anymore. So if you use the enum value in some sort of calculation, or we did in our code someplace, we have to refactor the code to take another approach. So that's why by default enums, which are a very common extension point, are not extensible. We've taken the approach of looking at what enums are required by the ecosystem, both in telemetry and by request, and prioritize those, as well as enums that basically come for free, where we did some static analysis of the code base to figure out that it was going to be a cool thing to do. There's also some compiler warnings in the platform now that will highlight when an extensible enum is used inappropriately going forward.
Yeah, so to give you a flavor of that, so an enumeration like yes, no, so the yes will have a value of 0, the no will have a value of 1, something like that. What we do is when we want to make it extensible, we'll look at the code and we'll make sure that no one's using those values. No one's checking for the 0 or the 1 or doing some math on those values, that they're using the yes and the no as in the code directly, so that those can be extended. Say you want to add a maybe into that, you can go ahead and do that. So chain of command, so class extension, class extensibility, class augmentation, we refer to it a number of different ways. In the documentation, we kind of run through the different ways that people will talk about it. We use class augmentation as kind of a generic term to try and disambiguate things a little bit. But chain of command is something that we've put into the platform, and we'll just run through a little bit of the motivation for this. I will, and then Dave will run through a demo that makes use of chain of command to kind of bring that home. So this is a great capability that we've put into the platform, and then the application teams have been making it easier to use this by refactoring their code so that people can take advantage of this chain of command capability. So you can see here there's a chunk of code, a class with some methods. So this is imagining that the application provides this class. And then the ISV has some requirements to be able to change the value of the calcamount method. You can see that method right in the middle there. And then they want to insert a history log of the posting inside of the same transaction. So the way that you would traditionally do that with overlayering is you would just crack right into that class and change it. And then you're going to have trouble with regards to upgrade. Before chain of command, so that was kind of the old way of doing it. The newer way of doing it was for the application teams to kind of add extensibility into things. And this is before we had this chain of command capability. So the application teams would take that class and they would add some delegates. You can see those delegates are posted and posting down the bottom. They would add a hookable up the top. They would add a public member for getting access to that journal member. And they would make it more extensible. But there was a bunch of work that had to go on to make that class more extensible from our application teams within Microsoft. So you can see those examples here with the hookable, the journal member, and then adding those delegate callouts and the delegates. And I will just roll through this. And then so someone that wanted to extend this method would then have to write some rather complicated code. So you can see here that they're having to take advantage of args. They have to know that they need to do like a get arg num. You can see that at the bottom of the second block of red highlighted code. They have to do like an args.get this. You can see that at the top. They have to do an args.get return value. It's just very complicated code. And then even it's just very complicated code. So what we did was we added this chain of command capability. So this allows methods to be wrapped in an extension class. And then you can put a next keyword to call other instances, to call other implementations of that method. It allows access to the protected members and methods in the base class, and then multiple wrapped methods can be chained together as needed. So you can see here there's a kind of a swimlane diagram. The before is basically the first one, the one on the far left, and then the one on the far right. So the idea of like post is going to call calcamount, and then it's going to return to post. But with chain of command, it allows you to kind of insert some calcamount methods in the middle. So you can see ISV1 is adding an extension for calcamount, and then they do something, and then they call next. And then ISV2 is adding an extension for calcamount, and they can do something, and then they can call next. And then both of those extensions then get access to the return value as we're going along. The one thing to note here is that although we have it nicely set out as ISV1 on the left, ISV2 on the right, the order of the extension methods is not determined, so it can change. That's something to keep in mind. You should always be kind of guarding against that. So what does that chain of command capability allow the code to look like? Well, for the application teams within Microsoft that are building the code, they don't need to make any changes. So you are left with the same code. In some instances, they have to go into the code and they have to refactor to pull out methods that people are wanting to extend. And then the extension method, was there any? Yes. Just gonna make sure I got all the highlighting here. Okay, great. So the extension code that an ISV then gets to write is a lot simpler. You're creating an extension class, you're creating a calc amount method, and then the key thing to note in that calc amount method is that next call. So that first line is saying I'm going to grab the amount and I'm going to call next on the calc amount because I want to do something with the amount once the kind of original class has executed calc amount. And then I'm going to check for general types of inventory, and I'm going to check for the legal entity, and I'm going to change the amount, and then I'm going to return that. So that next call is that important piece. You didn't need to do anything with delegates. It's a very kind of natural way of extending the class, and a very kind of, yeah, it's a lot cleaner. You don't have to mess with the args and calling next and the number of the arguments, things like that. And then you can see there that they've also got a post method, and they've got that log inside of a transaction, and they're calling next post in there inside of that transaction, so that there's now an outer transaction wrapping the inner transaction. And if any part of that transaction fails, that log won't write. But the log is being written within a transaction context with the rest of the code, the original code.
Yeah, so one of the challenges, I mean, in the past, you could have used delegates, or you could have used the pre and post events that were part of the method, but those were static event handlers. So managing state between the pre and the post was challenging. You couldn't wrap the other method in like a using statement or a try catch, or in this case, a TTS begin and end. So it enables a lot of new scenarios that we didn't have before with the event handler / delegate methods.
Right. So as far as benefits, yeah, it limits refactoring on the application side to enable these common extensibility scenarios, and then a bunch of partner scenarios are unblocked. Partner code is also easy to author. Hopefully you've got a flavor for that there, where you're not having to deal with the args and using complicated code paradigms. And then it supports multiple partners side by side as well. And so with that, we'll go on to
the
demo.
So a lot of the requests that we're getting from partners on the application side, I think on the order of 20% or maybe a little bit more have basically gone away because we've added this new capability. Part of it is the wrapping capability, but then the other big part is the access to protected members in a class, which wasn't the case before protected members or methods. You'd have to explicitly add the hookable attribute in order to do that. So it's been a big boon for us. It's also changed kind of how the approach we've taken for enabling extensibility in the application. Typically, it involves now refactoring code. Maybe it's a large method, refactoring code. Instead of inserting a delegate someplace in the middle of the code base, we'll refactor this larger method so that the code of interest basically goes out into a single purpose method that then the partner or customer can wrap in this chain of command pattern.
Right. I'll mention one other thing. So that Dynamics 365 operations, extensibility, documentation. So we've mentioned a number of times partners and ISVs making requests for extension capabilities. So that documentation on one of the introduction pages, we have information about the Yammer group that you can join to request new capabilities. So if you need an extension capability, or if you're expecting an extension capability and it's not there yet, you can go on that Yammer group and you can ask for that capability. So go out to that documentation and join that Yammer group if you're interested.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion. There's a very active Yammer extensibility discussion group. There's some sign-up process that you have to go through regarding NDA and things like that to be able to be part of that group, but it's definitely well worth it. So I'm going to walk through a code example. It's a very similar example to what Chris walked through on PowerPoint, probably even a little bit simpler. The idea is just a simple tax calculation. So given an amount, calculate the tax, and I just created a little form to visualize this a little bit. So I have an amount of $100, I have a tax rate of 7%, and my tax value is $7 as expected. So So that's the starting point. So I put this into our fleet management model, which is kind of our demo sample app that's in the application, just to make it part of the product, but yet not really part of the product. So that's the starting point. We have this simple class and form in fleet management, and now we're going to go and walk through an extensibility scenario. So typical scenario is somebody buys something, pulls some money out of their wallet, and you have sales tax going to the government. We're going to have a new type of tax to a special place in Minnesota called the Land of Froz. And the Land of Froz, who has an emperor, it's kind of a special kind of organization there. It gets a little cut out of all these sales. So and the sales tax is a percentage of the sales tax that would go to the rest of the government. That's the idea here. So to do this, I'm basing it on the fleet management where this tax calculation exists. I have a Land of Froz model, product model, that will have my extension. But I'm also a big believer in test-driven development, and having a strong suite of regression tests is going to be an important part of reducing the friction and upgrade as well. So we're going to walk through that, and I have a Land of Froz test model as well. One of the things we'll mention with difference between overlay and extensions is there's an idea in D365 where you have models, and models go into packages, and you can have multiple models in a package. If you're overlaying, the model with the overlayered code has to be in the same package as the thing you're overlaying. So the most common thing that you overlay is the application suite, which is a large model. So that means that the package you deploy is very, very large because you have to have your overlayered model within there. It also means if you're going to do a full rebuild, you're going to rebuild the full application suite, which is a lengthy task. So extensions enable you to pop out of that package, have your own package that you can simply build and deploy as a separate entity, and that's part of the benefit here. So we'll go back to implement the Land of Froz tax implementation. So we're going to start in test code, right? So this is Visual Studio, as you can see, and this is our development environment for D365. And we have a test framework it's been in the product for many releases. I think it came in 4.0 or something like that. That's called SysTest, and it's a test framework just like MS Test or NUnit or JUnit or those types of things. It's got a lot of the same features as that. So with test-driven development, you write your test, and typically you write it such that it fails because you haven't written the product code yet, and then you write the product code to make the test pass. So that's what I've done here. I've created a test of Land of Froz tax, and in this case, I've set up a tax rate of 10%, and I calc tax on amount to 20, and I'm expecting a value of 3 back because I'm assuming that there's a 50% Land of Froz tax rate, so 50% of the other tax. So instead of 2, I get 3 back, but of course, I haven't implemented my Land of Froz tax extension yet, so the test fails. And that's what you see over in the bottom corner. Assertion failed, expected 3, actual is 2. So we have to go implement this extension. So let's go first look at this tax class, which is very simple. It's got a protected member variable called tax rate, which gets initialized with the constructor. And then the calc tax just takes that tax rate and times it by the amount and returns it. So in the old days, one thing you'd think about doing in order to add additional state, which is the Land of Froz tax rate, you could just overlay the new method and add another parameter, but that breaks things in general, right? That's an intrusive style customization, so that you can't do anymore. So you have to figure out another way in order to add additional class state and then apply this chain of command pattern that we've been talking about. So fortunately, there's some really good documentation out there. There's the documentation homepage that Chris mentioned, But we also have some blogs that are written by developers on the team that are also referenced from that extensibility homepage. So this was written by Michael Frugard, who's a developer in Denmark. He's been around the AX team for forever, seemingly. So he goes by MFP. So this is the MFP 2 cents blog post. He talks about method signatures and how, first of all, changing method signature is an intrusive customization because every place that calls that method now has to be changed. And secondly, you need to do something with that new parameter anyway. So he gives you some options, including what you might want to do in the case of adding class state, which is our scenario here. And so he just talks about in an extension class, you can add a additional member variable there and use that in your chain of command scenario. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to copy some code to save you guys from seeing me typing in front of a group here. I've created a Land of Fraz extension class that's in my Land of Fraz model, and you can just see the attribute on top that defines an extension class of the FM tax method. It has to be a final class, and it has to have the underscore extension at the end. Those are the rules. We'll paste my code in here. So I've added this additional member variable, the Land of Fraz tax rate, and I've initialized it to 50% just so we have a default value. And then you can see down here I've called the next calc amount. So this would call the base class or other ISV calc amounts or implementation partners, added a info log statement, and then calculated my new tax value based on the tax value I got from the base class plus the buffer of the Land of Fraz tax rate that goes to the Emperor of the Land of Fraz. And then I need to change one thing in my, my tax test because now I have a way to initialize the tax value for Land of Fraz. We're not responding. Give me a second.
This is why we took screenshots, just in case.
This is why we did that, Chris? Yeah.
Hopefully it comes back. Oh, is it just the window or the RDP session?
It seems like it's Visual Studio that's hanging on me. All right, well.
You show some slides and then come back to it.
Yeah. We're not exactly sure what's hanging up here, so let me just do a little bit of a PowerPoint walkthrough here. So this is my example test class, and I've added the Land of Fraz tax rate, in this case of 0.5, and now this shows the test actually having executed, and now the test passes. So I've achieved my goal of implementing an extension that causes my tax rate to now bring some money to the Emperor Land of Fraz. And then going back into the form, you can see now that the extension is firing, that the tax on $100 instead of $7 is now $10.50 with that 50% buffer. So we have that calculation being implemented the way we would expect it with the extension. So I'm just going to drop back and see if Visual Studio has decided to join us again. System out of memory exception. Interesting. Well, we'll see if it behaves. So I'm just going to catch up with my demo slides here. And since I already showed that, let's just go back to so what I need to do next is actually initialized that land defrost tax rate in the form, right? So it worked in my sample just because it got defaulted in my extension, but I need to do something real with that. So jumping into the Application Explorer, the AOT, for those of you in older releases of AX, we have this FM tax form mockup, which is what I've been using here. And if I right-click on it, you see some different examples, different things you can do with it. Customize really means overlayer in how we have this set up with Visual Studio. So this is the thing that's going to eventually go away. If I try to customize something that's sitting in the platform model, first of all, I don't know if that option is even available to you. If it is, it's going to give you a message right away that says you can't do that. So what we want to do is create an extension. So we have now our FM tax form mockup.extension. And we'll just talk a little bit about some of the things you can do in a form, and then I'm going to walk through initializing things within that form. So in the design now, I just have two controls on this form, the text box and the button. So now I can go in here and add any number of controls into my form, just like you might do before with an overlayered scenario. You can extend the form with different things. You also have these events. So Chris talked about the ING and ED events. And if we actually look at the code for the FM text form mockup, you can see that in the init call is where the tax class is set up. So one way I could do this is on initialized. I could go and create an event handler that would react to the fact that the form is initialized and add my state variable. And I'll just show you what that looks like. I can say copy event handler, go through and create a new class. We'll just let it flow through with the default name. Now I have my class 1, and I can just paste in my event handler, and now I can add some code to that. But one thing with event handlers, they suffer from what Chris showed you before, is that the programming model is not super obvious. You have this form run sender, event args E, and you have all the information you need in those structures, but you have to dig through them a little bit and pull out the right information. And it's all available to you from a documentation standpoint and the like, but it's not real intuitive. So because we really love this chain of command feature, we're going to actually go and apply that to a form in this case instead of a class. So I'm going to delete this. And we can just go and create a new class. And we will use a proper naming convention in this case, FM tax form mockup LOF underscore extension. We'll add this. And like I said with the other example, it needs to be a final. And we have to specify that's an extension of. So we will do that. Extension of form stir FM tax form mockup bracket. Okay? And now the signature for the chain of command is just the same as the method itself. So if you go back here, you can see it's just public void init. So we just type public void init. And we want to now set the tax class, which is a member variable. It's a protected member. So we can just say tax class dot LOF tax LOF. So we don't have IntelliSense because we haven't got things compiled yet. And I'm going to set, boy, you should never type in front of a group. Lesson learned. So we're just going to set that to 1, so that it's 100% tax rate that goes to Land of Fraz in addition to the government. So let's just build this. And I intentionally forgot something important here. I don't know if anybody has caught it. Yes, next. So I also non-intentionally didn't type so well. So chain of command method must contain one next call. So yes, we have to do next init. And does anybody, line of frost text? Oh, I have some residue from my earlier problems. So since I didn't finish the early part of the demo, I think that's my Land of Frost tax tests are the problem there. So now that I have this set up for the form, we could run the form if I fix my build errors, which I'm not going to take the time to do in front of the group here, and you'll see the Land of Fraz tax rate will now be doubled. So besides my missing next, there's another fairly fundamental flaw that I have in this whole example. Does anybody want to offer what they think that might be? So the interesting thing is about, just walk through to the end here. So this is what you would have seen if I would have had non-compile errors. We would have a tax rate of 7, Land of Fraz tax rate of 100%, and a $14 tax instead of 7. So the issue here is kind of back to the requirements. So the Land of Fraz tax value is based on the government tax value, right? It's a multiplier of that. Now, if I had another wrapped calc tax in my scheme, so say Chris came in and created a calc tax, and he changed the amount value based on some other, he's an emperor of some other place that happens to be a superset of the Land of Fraz.
That's right.
First of all, we don't know which order our two methods are going to be run, so I don't know if he's going to be before or after me. So it's really indeterminate that way. And also, it's not clear in my requirements, am I supposed to be a percentage of what's going to the base government, or the base government plus Chris, his region? So that would need to be clarified. So this is kind of going back to, we really need to understand the requirements. Now, if we really decided it's just part of the base government, there's other ways that I could do this calculation, right? I could look to see what the base class tax rate is and take a percentage of that and then multiply that by the amount or things like that, so I wasn't dependent on the amount. But it's some of the things you need to think about when you have potentially multiple solutions in play with the implementation. So with that, I'm just going to recap here what we did. So we showed method wrapping of a method in a class, so that was that calc tax. We showed access to the protected members. We showed access to, in the form, the tax class, which was a protected member. We wrapped a method in a form. You could also wrap a method in a table, so it's something that works across the board. There are a few things it doesn't work with, data sources, so basically nested classes it doesn't work with, for example. We briefly compared event handlers versus method wrapping, so we looked at the signatures there. And we saw that there's a build error if no next statement is in the chain method. So hopefully you got a good feel for what this new feature that we're pretty excited about anyway internally. So we're going to talk briefly about some best practices and then wrap up. So if you go out to the help site, there's an article about the qualities that you want to have in your solution. First of all, there's this idea of intrusive customizations, which I'll define a little bit more crisply in the next slide. We need side-by-side deployment for ISV solutions, which you saw in my example probably wouldn't work. So it's something you need to think through. And really, it all goes back to the low friction and upgrade, low or no friction and upgrade. So you want to think about if your code's going to be resilient to Microsoft changes, and you still have full access to source code. That's something that sometimes people ask. It's like, well, do we could still see the source code so we can see what's going on in Microsoft code? you still have full access to that. And you also have to think about resiliency to other ISV or solutions as well. And then really like I said, coming back to, is this going to be upgrade friendly as you move forward? So when you think about intrusive customizations, it's really anything that limits our ability to do this continuous update or low friction upgradability. So an intrusive customization does one of three things, three principles. It could change the type definition. So easy thing is method signatures and things like that, but it's also things a little bit more subtle, like table relations, constraints, indexes, things like that. Can't break encapsulation. You can't change access modifiers, which you might have been able to do before. And it also must be additive in nature, right? Overlaying is not additive in nature, but that's what you need to be thinking about. There's some other criteria around that. So if you run into these situations, there's kind of a three-step thing to think about. First of all, can you refactor your code or refactor your functional requirements so that it's non-intrusive? So that's the first step. If you come to a dead end with that, then it's time to reach out to Microsoft. And like Chris said, there's description of how the patterns that you can do that to get through to the development team on the Microsoft side and work to see if there's some extensibility features that can be added. But there are some cases where it's just not going to make sense to implement this change that's not going to be upgrade friendly. And that's something we haven't gotten to item number 3 in all our discussions that we've been working with ISVs in general, or it's very rare that we've had to do that, but we want to just kind of plant that seed that it's not carte blanche. You can do anything like maybe you would be able to do in the past, potentially at an expense of being dropped from the baseline. But going forward, there's some possibilities that that's not going to exist. So a couple other kind of high-level best practices. So one of the fundamental software engineering principles is this idea of open-closed. It's part of this set of solid principles. So you want software entities to be open for extension, closed for modification. So you don't want to go reopen a method that you've already tested and validated that it's going to work with sprinkled in some additional code, like some additional conditionals and things like that. You want to add that code in a new class or a new method or something like that that can be independently tested. That's the intent of this principle. And this has been something that I think a lot in the ecosystem have wanted for a long time. They realize that overlayered violates this principle and it's not the best software engineering practice. So extensibility does enable this, and that's kind of a core principle that we want to be thinking about. As part of your planning and analysis process, there's a tool called the Customization Analysis Report. It's a core part of our app source curation process for ISVs where they have to provide this report. It's a command line tool that you can run with details in the link down below here. And it'll give you information on what's overlayered, and what's overlayered where, and it has other information like best practices and stuff. We've used it from our app source ISVs to mine a bunch of information to understand what's happening, but it's a very useful tool in any given instance as well to learn about what's overlayered, do some analysis, do some planning, categorizing the different types of overlaying. So that's an important best practice. Proper naming is important. There's still the possibility of collisions, so people who have been doing X development for a long time have been following naming practices for a long time. There's an article out there, and that's why I took some care to brutally type in some of these names while we're doing my demo. Basically, the root of it is a prefix that's used on all the things that you create. It's typically a 3-letter prefix. We follow that same practice internally, and it allows us to assign ownership very easily to code artifacts. It's been a pretty powerful tool for us to really manage our workload. So that's a best practice. And then last but not least, so some of you may have seen my name associated with test in the past. So I've been a test architect on the team for much of the last several years, we, with AX7, made some pretty significant changes in how we built automated tests internally. And I have a series of blog posts that I'd love for you to go out and take a look at when you get a chance. But the important thing as we think about upgrade-friendly, low-friction scenarios is that we're going to make a commitment once we've locked down an extensibility to have, to move towards a binary update model, which doesn't require a code upgrade process. But still, to have some functional verification, you need to have some level of testing done. It's not going to be completely seamless. So building a set of tests that you can run as part of the upgrade process gets to be even more important to keep current with the current release cycle. And the way you want to do that is to follow a pyramid where you have a core set of unit tests, like what I showed you in the example, that tests pretty granular functionality. And like I said, you can do this more easily with extensibility, and then build on up from that. Too often, what we see in implementations is the goal to kind of build out the big end-to-end test that kind of tests everything. And while it's important to have some tests like that, there's several challenges with that from an automation standpoint as far as making that run reliably, being able to maintain that, being able to isolate what really happened when you got a failure so that you have some precision that enables you to figure out what's going on. And the way you get around that is to follow this pyramid and build out the automated tests in this way. So that's it kind of from a high-level standpoint of best practices. Like Chris said, there's a ton more documentation out on the extensibility homepage, and that's really the go-to place, much more than the surface that we're scratching in the session today. But to kind of close down and wrap up, so we had the three outcomes. I hope you've gotten the what we see as the benefits of extension-based customization, and a flavor of what the customization capabilities are in the project or in the product, and a little bit about patterns of moving code from overlaying to extensions. Like I said, we're just scratching the surface to some extent. But nothing else, you learned a little bit about pace lines, hopefully, and why we think that's important. The call to action here is that this is something that we know has impact, right? We're feeling the impact internally. ISVs are feeling the impact, and we know it's going to ultimately have impact with implementations and is having impact with implementations. But it's something that there will be short-term pain for what we believe to be significant long-term gain with reducing the upgrade costs. So the call to action really is to think about this no matter which box you belong to in this group. Start to be thinking about what your implementation, what your customizations look like, and how you can move those to an extension-based model so that it's going to be a lower cost upgrade process as you go. Please evaluate the session. Give us some feedback, what things you liked, what things you didn't like, both about the content and the speakers. We value that feedback. And then the list of resources that I pulled out, some of those from the deck. There's sub-nodes from a lot of these nodes as well. But these are a good set of resources, and you have mine and Chris's email addresses. So if you have questions now or in the future, feel free to reach out to us. And we have about 10 minutes for questions now. So with that, we'll wrap up the formal part of the presentation. There are no mics in here, so we'll just have you shout out your question, raise your hand and shout out the question, and then we'll try to repeat it. So in the back there.
Yes, the situation we're in is we're going to do a completely new point of running the CRM. Do you see any, over the next, say, 6 months, do you see any need to use overlayer at all, or do you think we would be able to begin round 1.0 with the new?
So, well, you mentioned CRM, so the finance and operations, yeah. Yeah, no, there, you should be in a place, and we have, as you saw in our survey of current customers, that number of customers have been able to implement overlayer-free solutions. So there should be, that should be your goal. You might run into a block. You might be blocked by something. I mean, the most common thing might be you have to extend an enum that isn't extensible yet,
Right.
or you need a hook point in a method that's a long method that doesn't have the right factoring to enable it, and that's where you just need to reach out to us, and we'll work to make that happen.
One more real quick question while I have you.
Yeah.
Was the language you were showing, you had mentioned C++ earlier.
Yeah.
Or was the language you were showing earlier C# for the extension?
It's X++.
For the extension?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So X++ is the core language that's used in the AX platform. It is an IL compatible language, a .NET compatible language, just like C# and VB.NET and things like that. So it compiles down to the intermediate language, which is the .NET compatible language, but it's syntactically a little different. It's got some kind of business domain specific features as well. It's been around though since for 20 years really. So yeah, right there.
First one about the enumerators. So if enumerator is possible to extend, but you cannot provide the value not determined. So if you want to propagate that data from production environment to test environment, and so on and so forth, data contains enumerator values.
Yeah.
How
So it is stable within an implementation. So it's actually when you do the DB sync, it actually at that point becomes stable. But if you go to a different implementation, it may not be reliable. So, but be able to move within your environments, that's still that's okay. Okay. Yeah.
You showed us in one of the first slides there that apparently 40% of the code running is still sort of classic conversations. If that picture doesn't change substantially in the next 6 months, are you honestly going to cut off a large chunk of your customers from the peloton?
So do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. I forgot to do that before. So if we don't get the remaining 40% off of overlaying by the spring release, are we going to cut them off? So first of all, they do have. It doesn't mean that you have to instantly move to that latest version, right? There's a 3-year support cycle on the license for. So we do, and this will have to be a discussion with the business team, right? Which Chris and I are not part of, but
right.
The goal would be to move that overlayered code to extensions, and there's a 3-year window to do that. Of course, we don't want you to wait 3 years, and you don't want to wait 3 years because you want to ride with the group, right? So that's we're going to have to evaluate. I mean, we know that there's, especially these customers who have a lot of overlaying in current state, that we need to.
Yeah, you provided nice tools to move the overlaying from 2012, so we acted over good faith, right?
Yeah.
And now you say, sorry.
Yeah, we can have a follow-up conversation about your specific situation. So, yeah.
Another question. So this chain of command that came out earlier, are there any other features that are planned to come out soon that would help customize the similar to it?
Yeah, the question was about other features coming out to provide more extensibility capabilities. So yeah, chain of command came out in update 8, I think, or update 9.
Well, it actually came in 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just after the July release. Yep.
Okay, nice. Yeah, there are other changes coming. As Dave mentioned, like adding extensibility to enums. So the application teams are working on making more of those extensible. And then there are, some other capabilities coming. But they're much smaller than the chain of command one that we highlighted. they'll be highlighted as a what's new in that extensibility area, and then there's a what's new kind of for the product as a whole that we mentioned in both of those.
What's new is kind of what is new. What's going to be new is more interesting because if we're planning to do something, we need to know how to maybe perhaps we wait until the
Sure. Sure.
So we have the roadmap site. I forget the URL for that. Do you know that, Chris?
No.
Roadmap.dynamics.com?
No, but I mean, if you go to the extensibility homepage, you'll be able to get to that roadmap pretty easily as well.
Yeah. So there's a roadmap also out there. I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, a lot of the chain of command is something that folks have been waiting for a little while because they wanted to fully understand that before they jumped too far and too deep into it.
So the one thing from the roadmap that sticks out for me, maybe you have some other examples, Dave. But one thing that we've been looking to add is the ability to have like an if around a next call. So right now you have to call next. It can't be conditional, but we're looking to have like replacement capabilities as well. So
yes.
You can say if something, then call next. Otherwise, don't call it.
Yeah,
so that would be a replacement.
It'll be an opt-in thing, so that a method in the base Microsoft code will have a special attribute that says you can use chain of command in kind of a substitution manner.
Yeah.
It won't be across the board because there's many cases where we want to ensure the Microsoft code gets run, but there will be some cases where we don't want that, where we're okay with that, and that's actually coming, with one of the updates, platform updates. One of the monthly platform updates, which is, the beauty of the binary compatible updates.
Right.
So. It's a command line tool, but as long as you have a development environment, you can run it. So. I mean, I think it's just from a DOS prompt, but.
Yeah. So Dave, how do they get hold of that analysis tool?
So. Number one, I forgot to repeat the question. The question was, how do you, can you run the analysis tool from Visual Studio?
Yeah.
And it's part of any one-box deployment, so it'll be just there. And then the URL it's on the extensibility homepage, but if you have the deck, there's a link directly to it in the page that I talked about that. So.
Right.
Question up there?
So while you're thinking about that, so the question is about, like, they have an ISV that has overlayering. How do they know if that ISV is actually working with us to use
thanks for the help,
extensibility?
Chris, for repeating the question.
Yeah.
So first of all, the first question I'd ask is the ISV on our AppSource solution, or AppSource marketplace, right? And as part of AppSource, we're slowly increasing the requirements for them, all solutions to be overlayer free. And we're going to unblock many from having overlayers with this fall release.
And Dave, have we engaged all of those AppSource?
We have not. Well, we are engaging with all the AppSource ISVs.
Yes.
Have all the timing. It's been a rollout, so it hasn't happened, at a certain time. So that'd be the first question. If they are, then they should both know, and I would expect them to start being proactive with you. If
they would give us an update to apply after, application.
Right. Once,
yes.
with the probably most likely either. Well, they could do something within a certain window after the fall release. So ISVs on AppSource have a window of time after we release an application update that their solutions should be compatible with that update. And the goal would be to make several of those overlayer free at that point. But then the spring release, there'll be a similar window. Yeah.
And then the backup I should add is, you could just talk to them.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So are you talking about different, like different ISVs, different companies that are within your development team? Yeah.
Let me see if I got the question. So the question is multiple developers doing extensions on the same element. Yeah. What's
Right,
best
and-
practices for that?
Yeah.
So you ran
in-house-
through some of them.
Yeah, I mean, naming convention will be the first thing, right? If everybody follows the same naming convention, you're going to immediately have a duplicate in your code base. I mean, you're kind of getting into some kind of internal development ALM experiences,
Right.
And it's going to, as long as you follow the naming convention, even if you worked in isolation on different projects, it's going to come together as a conflict at some point in your build process at some point along the way.
I guess I would, at a high level, suggest not creating 2 extension classes, but instead having 1 extension class that the 2 developers are working in. Yeah. Right. They
Yeah,
just
'cause
have 1 extension.
Right, because the
Yeah.
naming convention would lead you to that, right?
Right.
In general. Now, I mean, as you get into different implementations with different customers, there might be, that might get more complicated if you try to merge those into some sort of common package at some point.
Right.
But that's a little bit of a special case. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.